Everyone knows the Titanic story, but most of what you think you know is probably wrong. Today we're looking at what people actually get wrong about the Titanic, the unsinkable ship that nobody called unsinkable. Here's something that'll surprise you. The Titanic was never actually marketed as unsinkable. The White Star Line never used that word in their advertising. Their actual slogan was, "Largest and finest steamers in the world." What they did say in a promotional brochure was that the ship was designed to be unsinkable, which is very different from claiming it couldn't sink. The word practically unsinkable showed up in a few trade magazines like Shipbuilder and the Irish News, but these weren't passenger advertisements. The general public and most passengers believed the ship was unsinkable, but that belief came from the era's blind faith in technology, not from the company making wild promises. It wasn't until after the disaster that newspapers started calling it the unsinkable Titanic, which is pretty ironic timing. The real story is that Captain Edward Smith himself said years earlier, "I cannot imagine any condition which would cause a ship to founder. Modern shipbuilding has gone beyond that." So the belief was widespread among experts, but White Star Line gets blamed for something they technically didn't do. Before we go further, if you enjoy these facts, hit that subscribe button because we've got plenty more surprising history coming your way. Those watertight compartments weren't actually watertight. This is where the engineering really failed. The Titanic had 16 watertight compartments that were supposed to keep the ship afloat if anything went wrong. The ship was designed to stay afloat with any 2 compartments flooded, or even 4 front compartments in some scenarios. Sounds pretty solid, right? Here's the problem. Those compartments were only watertight horizontally. The walls didn't go all the way up to the ceiling. They only extended a few feet above the waterline to about E deck when they should have gone up to A deck or at least C deck. When the iceberg damaged 6 compartments, the bow started tilting forward and water just spilled over the top of the walls into the next compartment, like an ice cube tray tilting in your freezer. Without those compartments, the ship actually might have stayed afloat longer. The water would have spread out horizontally, keeping the ship more level instead of pulling the bow down. Experts say this could have bought enough time for nearby ships to arrive and save everyone. The so-called safety feature actually sped up the sinking. And there's more. The rivets holding the steel plates together were made with too much sulfur, making them brittle in cold water. When the iceberg scraped along the hull, those rivets just popped off like buttons on a cheap shirt. The steel itself failed in what's called brittle fracture. Instead of bending, it just shattered. Modern tests on recovered pieces prove this. Captain Smith wasn't racing through an ice field. Hollywood loves to paint Captain Smith as either reckless or trying to set a speed record. Neither is true. The Titanic received multiple iceberg warnings throughout April 14th, and Smith did make a course correction, heading slightly south, but he didn't slow down much. The ship was traveling at about 22 knots, which sounds fast until you realize this was absolutely normal for 1912. Transatlantic liners in that era maintained speed even through ice fields. It was standard practice, not recklessness. Close calls with icebergs were common, and even head-on collisions weren't usually fatal. A German liner had rammed an iceberg in 1907, crushed its bow, and still completed the voyage. The British inquiry into the disaster concluded that Smith made a mistake, a very grievous mistake, but one in which, in face of the practice and of past experience, negligence cannot be said to have had any part. What really doomed the ship wasn't the speed. It was a perfect storm of bad luck. The night was unusually calm with no waves breaking against icebergs, making them nearly invisible. The lookout's binoculars were missing, locked in a storage locker because of a last-minute crew change. Second Officer David Blair was reassigned at the last minute and took the key to the binocular locker with him in his pocket. And Smith left the bridge to attend a dinner party during the most crucial part of the voyage through the ice field. The officer on duty, First Officer Murdoch, was left to make split-second decisions without proper tools or warnings. Some warnings never even reached the bridge. The wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, worked for Marconi, not the ship's crew. Their main job was sending passenger messages, not relaying ice warnings. When the Mesaba sent a critical warning about heavy pack ice and large icebergs, Phillips was too busy with passenger telegrams and never passed it along. The final warning from the Californian at 10:30 p.m. got cut off with Phillips snapping, "Shut up, I'm working at Cape Race. The movie got more wrong than you think." James Cameron's Titanic is famous for its attention to detail, but it also spread some serious myths. First Officer William Murdoch in the film accepts a bribe, shoots passengers, and kills himself. In reality, Murdoch was a hero who helped launch 10 lifeboats and saved hundreds of lives. Cameron later apologized to Murdoch's family, saying, "I was being a screenwriter. I wasn't thinking about being a historian." The famous door scene everyone argues about, whether Jack could fit? Well, he physically could, but the real issue is whether it would have stayed afloat with both of them on it and whether they'd have survived the freezing water longer. People in that 28-degree water died within 15 to 30 minutes. Jack and Rose wade through flooded corridors for nearly half an hour with barely any effects, which wouldn't happen in real life. The movie also shows third-class passengers locked behind gates while the rich escaped first. In reality, the gates were there to comply with U.S. immigration laws, separating classes before Ellis Island arrival. Most were open during the evacuation, though some third-class passengers did struggle to find their way up through the unfamiliar maze of corridors. The band scene is partially wrong. While they did play until the end, most survivors said they played popular ragtime music, not the solemn hymn, "Nearer My God to Thee," shown in the film. Cameron chose drama over accuracy there, and honestly, it worked. The elderly couple in bed is based on a real couple, Isidore and Ida Strauss, though we don't know exactly how they spent their final moments. Cameron also made the sinking more dramatic than it was. The ship didn't rise to a perfect 90-degree angle, and the breakup happened differently than shown. But you can't blame him too much. A realistic sinking wouldn't have been as gripping for audiences, and the movie did cost more to make than the actual ship, $200 million versus about $120 million when adjusted to $1997. The lifeboat problem was about outdated laws, not greed. Everyone thinks the White Star Line was cheap and didn't want to clutter the decks with lifeboats. The real villain was the British Board of Trade and their ancient regulations from 1894. Those rules said ships over 10,000 tons needed 16 lifeboats. That's it. The Titanic weighed 46,000 tons, nearly 5 times the limit in the regulations. The rules simply hadn't kept up with how massive ships had become. And here's the kicker. The Titanic actually exceeded requirements with 20 lifeboats holding 1,178 people. The ship had davits capable of holding 48 lifeboats and had been designed to accommodate up to 64, but they only installed 20. Why didn't anyone update the rules? The Board of Trade believed modern ships with watertight compartments were essentially unsinkable, and lifeboats were really meant to ferry passengers to rescue ships, not hold everyone at once. This thinking was tragically wrong. After the disaster, the first International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea met in 1913 and mandated that ships carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board plus an extra 25%. They also required 24-hour radio watch and ice patrols in the North Atlantic. The International Ice Patrol was established and still operates today, tracking icebergs and warning ships. But even with 20 lifeboats, the crew launched many of them half-empty. Second Officer Charles Lightoller testified he thought filling them to capacity would cause the davits to collapse, though the lifeboats had actually been tested with 70 men safely. There was no proper lifeboat drill. The scheduled one for April 14th was canceled by Captain Smith so passengers could attend church. Many people thought the lifeboat call was just a drill and stayed inside where it was warm. The delay was deadly too. More than an hour passed between hitting the iceberg and launching the first lifeboat. By the time they realized how serious it was, there wasn't enough time to launch everything properly. The ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, reportedly spent his final moments helping passengers into lifeboats and opening cabins to release trapped air, which might slow the sinking. 2 collapsible boats just floated away as the ship went under, with one floating upside down and people standing on it to survive. About 30 people managed to balance on collapsible B until rescue came hours later. The Titanic had been designed with safety in mind, but a combination of outdated regulations, overconfident engineering, and standard operating procedures that assumed modern ships couldn't really sink turned a survivable accident into one of history's deadliest maritime disasters. Now, if you realized what people get wrong about the Titanic, then like it and subscribe to the channel as we will be bringing up more exciting content soon. I'll see you later.